He thought his life had ended in the storm, until a lone husky appeared through the blizzard and refused to let him die. What happened next will restore your faith in miracles and loyalty. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. And if you believe that every soul deserves a second chance, hit subscribe, because today's story will melt even the coldest heart. The storm had no mercy that night. It moved like a living beast across the Alaskan wilderness, howling through the pines and clawing at the earth with icy hands. Snow whipped through the darkness, erasing roads, trees, even the faint outline of mountains. Everything that had form was swallowed by white chaos. Beneath that roaring emptiness, trapped inside a toppled truck on the edge of a ravine, a man clung to life by the thinnest thread. His name was Lucas Reed, a former combat medic who had once stared down death in deserts half a world away. But this storm, this cold, endless, merciless storm, felt different. It didn't rage to kill, it simply erased. He sat slumped against the shattered window of his overturned truck, his right leg pinned under twisted metal, his breath visible in the frigid air. Each inhale came slower than the last. The heater had died hours ago, and the cold was sinking into his bones, dulling pain, stealing sensation. The clock on the dashboard blinked 1:42 a.m., frozen in time, just like everything else. Outside, the blizzard screamed. Wind tore through the wreckage, shaking the frame until flakes poured in like broken glass. Lucas had tried to call for help until his voice went hoarse, but his radio was dead and his phone battery was gone. Now there was only the storm and silence. He thought of his wife, Hannah, her laughter echoing faintly in his fading mind. He thought of the little girl they'd lost in a car accident 3 winters ago, a memory so sharp it could still cut. Since then, every day had felt like another storm to endure. He had moved north, away from the world, away from people, chasing solitude and punishment in equal measure. Tonight it seemed solitude had finally claimed him for good. He closed his eyes. The wind roared like 1,000 ghosts outside, and for a moment Lucas wondered if he would simply drift away, another frozen casualty no one would ever find. His heartbeat slowed, faint and uneven. The last thing he remembered thinking was that maybe this was fitting, a medic who had saved others but couldn't save himself. Then raw and faintly impossibly came a sound. At first it was no more than a whisper against the storm, a rhythmic crunching, slow and deliberate, as if something moved against the wind. Lucas opened his eyes, barely aware, his breath shallow. He strained to listen. There it was again, closer now. Then a bark, sharp, cutting through the howl of the blizzard, like a flare of life in the void. Lucas frowned weakly. He must have been hallucinating. No creature could survive out there tonight. But the sound came again, louder this time, followed by scratching, digging. Something was tearing through the snow above the wreck. Through the shattered windshield, a shape appeared, vague at first, then distinct against the swirl of white. A dog. Its fur was thick silver gray, dusted with frost, eyes glowing pale blue in the reflection of Lucas's flashlight. The animal moved with purpose, digging fiercely at the snow covering the cab. Each movement was powerful, relentless. The creature barked again, short and sharp, as if commanding him to hold on. Lucas stared in disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. But the dog didn't stop. Snow flew in every direction. When the animal reached the door, it gripped the torn handle with its teeth and pulled, muscles straining. Metal groaned. A crack appeared, then another. "Come on." "Cheery," Lucas muttered, forcing his numb fingers to move. He pressed against the frame, and between man and beast the door finally gave way. A burst of freezing air rushed in, and the dog pushed through, shaking snow from its coat. It was a husky, built for the wild. Strong shoulders, long legs, fur shimmering like moonlit steel. A scar ran across one paw, but it moved with stubborn grace. The husky sniffed the air, then padded to Lucas's side, pressing its warm body against his arm. Lucas blinked. You're real," he whispered. The dog looked up at him, head tilted, as if answering. Its eyes were astonishing, clear as glacier water, steady and alive. For the first time that night, Lucas felt something besides pain. He felt heat. The husky lay down beside him, curling against his chest, trapping warmth between them. Its breath steamed in the cold air, rhythmic and calm. Lucas rested a trembling hand on the thick fur. "Balto," he murmured, the name surfacing without thought. "I'll call you Balto." The husky's ears flicked, as if approving. Outside, the wind continued to rage. But inside the ruined cab, there was a small island of warmth, a fragile alliance between a broken man and a wild soul. Time passed without meaning. Lucas drifted in and out of consciousness. He dreamt of light, a lantern swinging in a cabin window, a hearth burning bright. And through the haze, he felt the dog's heartbeat steady against his ribs, fierce and unwavering. When dawn came, it wasn't the light that woke him, it was movement. The husky had risen and was tugging gently at his sleeve. The storm had weakened, and through the gap in the snow, a faint blue glow hinted at morning. Lucas groaned, the pain in his leg flaring to life again. "You want me to move?" he rasped. The husky barked once, then stepped toward the gap in the snow, glancing back expectantly. Its tail flicked with impatience. All right, Lucas muttered. "Lead the way." Forward. It took nearly an hour to free himself. He tore a strip of fabric from his jacket to bind his bleeding leg and used a broken piece of metal as a crutch. The husky stayed close, nudging him when he faltered, growling softly when he tried to stop. The animal's instincts were clear. Movement meant survival. When they finally emerged from the wreckage, the world was white and endless. The blizzard had eased into a steady fall, and the silence that followed was almost holy. The truck lay half buried on its side, twisted like a fallen beast. Lucas turned toward the open wilderness, and for the first time since the accident, he felt the faintest spark of direction, because the husky was already walking ahead, stopping every few steps to look back and make sure he followed. They trekked through knee-deep snow, crossing a frozen creek in a field littered with bent birches. The wind bit at their faces, but the dog never wavered. Each time Lucas stumbled, Balto circled back, barking encouragement, eyes blazing with purpose. Finally, through the curtain of snow, Lucas saw a faint outline, a cabin, barely visible against the trees. He blinked, thinking his mind was playing tricks. But the husky bounded forward, tail high, and began scratching at the door. Lucas limped after him, every breath a battle, every step agony. When he reached the door, he pushed it open and nearly collapsed inside. The cabin was small, old, abandoned, but it was shelter. Balto circled him once, then lay beside him as Lucas crawled toward the hearth and lit a small fire with what dry wood he could find. The first orange flames flickered to life, painting the walls in trembling light. For the first time in years, Lucas prayed, not with words but with tears that steamed on his frozen cheeks. Beside him, the husky lifted its head and looked toward the window where the storm still roared outside. In its gaze there was no fear, only vigilance, as if it had found what it was sent to protect. And as the wind howled over the roof and the snow fell heavy once more, man and dog lay together in that fragile circle of light, survivors bound not by chance, but by destiny. Because that night, deep in the heart of the Alaskan wilderness, a man who had lost his will to live was found by a soul who refused to let him die, and neither of them would ever be the same again. Morning crept slowly across the frozen horizon, pale and uncertain, painting the snow in muted shades of silver and blue. The storm had finally broken, but the cold was still sharp enough to bite through bone. Inside the small hunting cabin, the air carried the mingled scent of smoke, frost, and something fragile, life hanging on by a thread. Lucas Reed stirred from a shallow sleep, the sound of crackling fire pulling him back to awareness. Every muscle in his body ached, and when he tried to move, a sharp pain tore through his leg. For a moment, confusion clouded his thoughts. Then memory returned in fragments. The crash, the cold, the storm, and those eyes, glacier blue, unflinching. He turned his head and saw the husky lying near the door, curled into a thick ball of fur, its chest rising and falling in slow, steady rhythm. Its coat shimmered in the soft light, silver gray streaked with white, the very color of the storm itself. On one of its forelegs was a long, crusted gash, the wound it had carried from before, now half frozen and raw. "Balto," Lucas whispered, his voice hoarse. The dog lifted its head, ears twitching, eyes alert but calm. It studied him for a long moment before padding over, each step silent on the wooden floor. Lucas reached out a hand, hesitant at first, then rested it on the husky's head. The fur was warm, impossibly warm. "You saved me," he murmured. "Guess we're both in one piece. Sort of." The husky pressed its muzzle against his arm, a quiet affirmation that needed no words. Lucas pushed himself upright, biting back pain. The cabin was bare but sturdy, a single room with a stone hearth, an iron stove, a small table covered in dust. He searched through the cupboards and found a few relics of past hunters, an old pot, some fishing line, a tin of coffee hardened to powder, and a nearly empty can of beans. Enough to survive another day, maybe two. He fed the fire again, melting snow in the pot to make water. When the steam began to rise, he cleaned the dog's wound with what little alcohol he found in a rusted first aid tin. The husky winced, but didn't pull away. Instead, it fixed its gaze on him, patient and unwavering. "You've done this before, haven't you?" Lucas said softly. "Helping fools like me." Outside, the wind groaned against the walls, but inside there was warmth, the kind that came not just from the fire, but from shared survival. As hours passed, Lucas began to feel his strength returning, though his leg throbbed beneath its rough bandage. The dog lay close to the fire, licking its paw, and Lucas found himself talking without meaning to. His voice sounded strange, as if it hadn't been used in years. "I was a medic once," he said. "Army field corpsman. I used to patch people up in places where you couldn't even hear yourself think. Gunfire, smoke, sandstorms. Always thought I was good at keeping others alive." He paused, staring into the fire. "But when it was my turn to save the ones I loved, I wasn't there." His words fell into the silence, sinking like stones. The husky tilted its head, eyes glowing amber in the firelight. Lucas smiled bitterly. "Yeah, you wouldn't understand." But deep down, he knew the dog understood more than most people ever had. There was something in its gaze, an old sadness, the kind that comes from losing what you can't replace. That night, the wind rose again. The storm had changed its voice, no longer wild but mournful. Lucas woke to the sound of low growling. Balto was on his feet, ears pricked, eyes fixed on the narrow window slit. "What is it?" Lucas whispered, reaching for the flashlight. He flicked it on, the beam cutting across the glass. Outside, snow whipped in ghostly spirals, but through it he saw a faint orange flicker far beyond the ridge. Fire. His pulse quickened. "Someone's out there!" Balto barked once, sharp and urgent, then ran to the door, pawing at it. No, wait!" Lucas tried to stop him, but the dog wouldn't be still. He looked out again, the distant glow growing stronger, like a dying beacon. Smoke, the unmistakable color of burning wood. He knew what it meant. Someone's shelter had caught fire. Lucas's instincts snapped awake. He might be broken, limping, and half-starved, but the medic in him couldn't ignore that sign. He grabbed his parka, a length of rope, and the old hunting axe from the corner. His breath came out in fog bursts as he turned to the dog. "You're not going without me," he said, his voice steadying. "We go together." Balto barked once. Agreement. They stepped out into the freezing dark. The wind hit them like a wall, and snow stung their faces like shards of glass. The husky moved ahead, tail raised, cutting through drifts that reached Lucas's knees. Each step forward was agony, but the fire's glow pulled him onward. Minutes stretched into hours as they climbed the ridge. The air was thick with the smell of burning pine before they reached the clearing. There, half collapsed and engulfed in flame, stood a ranger's outpost cabin. Its roof had caved in, sparks hissing into the snow. "God," Lucas breathed, stumbling forward. Then faint beneath the roar of the fire, he heard it. A cry. Balto darted toward the sound, nose low, barking furiously. Lucas followed, coughing through the smoke, until he reached the side of the building. Through a shattered window, he saw movement. A boy, no older than 15, pinned beneath a fallen beam. "Hang on!" Lucas shouted. He swung the axe against the half-burnt door until it gave way, then crawled inside. Heat blasted his face, smoke stung his eyes. The husky darted through the opening, weaving through debris toward the trapped teenager. The boy coughed weakly, his voice breaking through the chaos. "My brother, he's inside, please." Lucas's heart lurched. "Where?" The boy pointed weakly toward the back room. Without hesitation, Balto raced into the flames, disappearing behind a wall of smoke. "Balto!" Lucas yelled, but there was no answer. He turned back to the boy, prying at the beam with trembling arms. It wouldn't budge. He wrapped the rope around it, using the broken frame of a chair for leverage. Muscles screamed, lungs burned, but slowly, inch by inch, the beam shifted. The boy slid free, coughing violently. "Outside!" Lucas ordered, pushing him toward the doorway. Then, through the haze, movement. Balto emerged, his fur singed, eyes blazing, dragging something by the collar. A smaller child, unconscious but alive. The dog's paws slipped on the scorched floor, but he didn't stop until they reached Lucas. Together, they carried the boy out into the snow. Lucas collapsed onto his knees, gasping as Balto stood beside him, sides heaving, chest rising and falling with fierce rhythm. The flames behind them roared higher, lighting the night like a cruel sunrise. Lucas checked both children. Pulse, breathing, burns. The younger one coughed, sputtered, then started crying. Relief flooded through Lucas so sharply it made him dizzy. He looked at the husky, kneeling beside the boys, steam rising from its fur. "You did it," he whispered. "You brought them back." Balto looked up at him, tired, covered in soot, but alive. The sound of helicopter blades reached them moments later, slicing through the storm. Search and rescue. They'd seen the fire. Lucas waved a flare he found near the wreckage, and the helicopter circled, preparing to land. As rescuers rushed forward, wrapping the boys in blankets, Lucas turned to Balto. The dog stood a few feet away, staring at him, ears back. "Come on," Lucas said, motioning. "We're getting out of here." But the husky didn't move. The wind caught its fur, silver and ghostly under the floodlights. It looked at Lucas one last time, a look that said everything words could not, and then turned toward the trees. "Wait," Lucas shouted. "You can't just—" But Balto was already gone, vanishing into the snow, swallowed by the forest as if the storm itself had reclaimed him. Lucas stood there, heart breaking, as the rescuers loaded the boys into the helicopter. When one of them asked his name, he could barely answer. He just looked toward the woods, the place where a shadow moved like wind among the trees, and whispered, "He saved us." As the helicopter lifted off, the wilderness below stretched endless and silent once more. But somewhere in that silence, a lone husky trotted across the white expanse, guided not by command or instinct, but by something higher, the call of purpose. And though Lucas would never know it, the sound of his own heartbeat now matched the rhythm of 4 steady paws, disappearing into the dawn. Because sometimes the Savior doesn't stay. Sometimes he just makes sure you live, and then vanishes back into the storm. Night had swallowed the horizon once more. But this time, it wasn't the storm that ruled the Alaskan wilderness. It was the silence that follows survival. The helicopter had long since vanished into the clouds, carrying away the 2 rescued boys and leaving behind only the wreckage of what had been. Lucas Reed stood alone on the ridge, the glow of the burned-out ranger's station painting faint orange halos on the snow. His body trembled, not from cold but from something deeper, the hollow echo of loss. Balto was gone. He had watched the husky disappear into the endless white, tail vanishing like smoke. For hours afterward, Lucas had kept scanning the tree line, hoping for a flash of silver fur, a bark, anything. But there was only wind and the faint creak of settling ice. Now, back in the small hunting cabin, the fire burned low in the hearth. Lucas sat near it, bandaged legs stretched out, a wool blanket draped over his shoulders. The cabin felt different without the sound of claws against the wood, without that rhythmic breathing beside him. He stared at the flickering flames and whispered into the stillness, "Thank you, boy." His voice cracked. "You didn't have to save me again." The silence that followed felt vast. He could almost imagine that if he listened hard enough, he'd hear paws crunching outside, the gentle huff of a cold nose pressing against the door. But the only answer was the whisper of the wind sneaking through the cracks in the cabin walls. He slept restlessly that night, haunted by dreams of snow and flame. In one, he saw Balto standing in a burning forest, howling toward the sky, while shadows closed in. In another, the Husky led him across a frozen lake that kept cracking beneath their feet, each step echoing like the beat of a fading heart. By dawn, Lucas could no longer bear staying still. He gathered what supplies remained, rope, a few flares, a small medkit, and stepped into the icy air. His leg ached with each movement, but he ignored it. The sky was clear now, the first blue morning he'd seen in weeks, and the world sparkled as though made of shattered glass. He began to walk. He didn't know where he was going exactly, only that his compass pointed north, toward the deep valleys that stretched beyond the frozen river. He had no rational reason to believe Balto was there, but instinct whispered otherwise. There was a pull, faint but unshakable, as though the bond they'd forged in the storm still tugged at him across the distance. Hours passed. The cold gnawed at his lungs and the silence pressed in like a weight. Ravens circled above, their cries distant and hollow. Then faintly Lucas noticed something. Tracks, paw prints in the snow, distinct and wide, moving in a straight line toward the foothills. He smiled weakly. "You're out there, aren't you?" He followed them until the sun began to dip behind the mountains, the sky turning to molten gold. The prince led him to a narrow gorge, where snowdrifts gathered like waves against the stone walls. And there, barely visible through the mist of his breath, rose smoke. Not from fire this time, but from something else. Campfire smoke. Lucas crouched low, moving carefully. His heart hammered as he peeked over a ridge, and froze. In the small clearing below, half buried beneath the snow, stood a broken snowmobile. Two men huddled beside it, both dressed in thick parkas. Between them lay the carcass of a deer, freshly killed. One man was sharpening a knife, the other smoked a cigarette, his eyes narrow and restless. And near the fire, chained to a tree, was Balto. Lucas's breath caught in his throat. The husky's fur was matted with frost and soot, and a crude metal collar bit into his neck. He lay still, his gaze fixed on the men, body tense but unbroken. Anger flared hot in Lucas's chest. He didn't need to guess what kind of men these were. Trappers, or worse, poachers. Out here, the line between desperation and cruelty was thin as ice. He waited until the men began arguing, something about splitting the meat, then crawled silently closer, heart pounding. The snow muffled his movements. Each breath felt too loud. When he reached the edge of the camp, he saw Balto lift his head, ears twitching. Recognition flickered in those glacier blue eyes. "Easy, boy," Lucas whispered. The husky didn't move, but a low, almost inaudible whine escaped him. Lucas inched closer. He reached for the chain, found the clasp, and began to unhook it. But the metal was frozen, fused shut. He took out his knife, pressing the blade into the chain's hinge. It groaned softly and snapped. The sound was small but enough. "Hey!" one of the men barked, spinning toward him. "What the hell?" Lucas lunged to his feet as the other man grabbed for a rifle leaning against the snowmobile. A single shot cracked through the clearing, echoing off the rock walls. Snow exploded beside Lucas's boot. He ducked, rolling behind a fallen tree. Balto snarled, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated through the ground. The chain still dangled from his collar, but now he was free. He launched himself at the nearest man, a blur of silver and fury. The man shouted, swinging the knife, but Balto was faster. His weight crashed into the man's chest, teeth clamping down on the rifle arm. The weapon fell, discharging into the snow. Lucas burst from cover, tackling the second man before he could reach the gun. The two tumbled, fists and shouts breaking the silence. Lucas fought through the haze of pain and exhaustion, every instinct from his military years flooding back. A quick feint, a strike to the ribs, a shove into the snow. When the man tried to get up, Lucas brought the butt of the rifle down hard, once, twice, until the struggle ended. Breathless, he looked toward Balto. The husky stood over the other man, teeth bared but not biting, eyes cold and commanding, a soldier guarding his ground. "Enough," Lucas said hoarsely. "He's done." Balto stepped back, tail lowering. The man scrambled away, clutching his arm, eyes wide with fear. "You're insane," he spat. "That's a wild dog. He'll turn on you." Lucas turned his gaze on him, calm and steady. "Then maybe you should start running." The man didn't wait for a second invitation. He stumbled through the drifts, disappearing into the woods. The other followed soon after, limping. The world went quiet again. Lucas dropped to one knee beside Balto, his breath fogging in the air. The husky's chest rose and fell quickly, but his eyes, those fierce, intelligent eyes, were steady. "You came back to save me," Lucas murmured, "and I came back to save you. Guess we're even now." Balto pressed his head against Lucas's shoulder, the faint tremor in his body betraying exhaustion. Lucas wrapped his arms around him, feeling the thud of a heart that refused to quit. For a long time they stayed like that, man and dog surrounded by snow and silence. Two survivors in a world that had tried its best to break them. When Lucas finally stood, he looked toward the distant ridge. "Come on, partner, let's go home." They made their way back slowly, each step lit by the faint shimmer of moonlight on snow. The forest seemed softer now, almost welcoming. The cold still burned, but it no longer felt empty. Not when there was purpose. As they neared the cabin hours later, Lucas glanced back one last time. Behind them, the fire from the poacher's camp had gone out completely. Only smoke remained, curling lazily into the night sky. He looked at Balto walking beside him, proud, scarred, indomitable, and felt something shift inside his chest. He'd spent years running from ghosts, but somewhere between the wreckage and the rescue, between the storm and the silence, he had found something far stronger than guilt. He had found grace. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled softly as Lucas sank into the chair, Balto curling up beside him. The world outside was frozen, still, eternal. But inside there was warmth, the kind that no storm could ever steal again. "Good boy," he whispered, stroking the husky's fur. "You brought me back." Balto lifted his head, those pale eyes gleaming in the firelight. And for a fleeting second, Lucas could swear he saw a spark there, something old, something divine, like the reflection of a soul that had been here before, sent once more into the world to remind a broken man that not all angels have wings. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and soundless. But this time, it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like peace. The thaw came slowly that year. It crept down from the peaks like a cautious traveler, melting the hard edges of winter one drop at a time. The snow that had once blanketed everything in silence now receded into rivulets of water, carving small paths through the frozen ground. Spring was still weeks away, but the land had begun to breathe again. Lucas Reed stood on the porch of the cabin, hands wrapped around a tin mug of steaming coffee, watching mist rise from the valley below. The air was still cold, but it carried a new scent. Damp earth, pine resin, and faint traces of smoke from other cabins scattered miles away. The wilderness was waking up. Beside him lay Balto, the husky whose silver-gray fur gleamed in the pale sunlight. His body had healed, though a faint scar traced along his foreleg, a reminder of battles fought and survived. He was leaner now, stronger, and every bit as wild as the world around them. "Looks like we made it through another one," Lucas murmured. Balto lifted his head, ears twitching, as if in agreement. It had been 3 months since that night in the gorge. 3 months since Lucas had found him chained and nearly broken. Since then, they had rebuilt the rhythm of their lives, chopping wood at dawn, tending the fire through long nights, sharing whatever food they could find or catch. The wilderness had a way of stripping life down to what truly mattered, and for Lucas, this was enough. Sometimes he would catch himself talking to Balto as though he were human, about the past, about the war, about the things he'd lost. The dog never interrupted, never judged. He would simply listen, head tilted, eyes steady and understanding. And for Lucas, that silent companionship meant more than words ever could. He'd written a letter a few weeks back, the first in years. It was addressed to his old commanding officer, Captain Will Garvey, now a park ranger down in Anchorage. The letter was simple, a recounting of the storm, the crash, the rescues, and the dog that had saved him twice. He'd ended it with one line. I thought I was the one who found him, but the truth is, he found me. The letter sat on the table, stamped and ready, waiting for the next supply pilot who'd promised to stop by once the trails cleared. That morning the air was calm, too calm. Lucas noticed it as he poured a second cup of coffee. The birds that usually sang at sunrise were quiet. The wind, which always whispered through the pines, had gone still. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of a distant crack. Balto's head shot up instantly. The dog's ears pricked, his muscles tensed. A second later, the ground beneath them trembled, a low, rolling vibration that seemed to come from deep within the mountains. Lucas's heart lurched. Avalanche, he whispered. He set the mug down and rushed to the edge of the porch. Across the valley, a curtain of snow was tumbling down the face of the ridge, moving faster than thought. It wasn't near enough to reach them, not yet, but he could see a trail cutting through the lower slopes, a logging path used by travelers and hikers. And then, through the haze, movement, a flicker of motion in the white chaos. Lucas grabbed his binoculars, focusing on the slope. Two figures, small, dark, running. They were trying to outrun the collapse, waving their arms, shouting, but the sound didn't carry. God! Lucas breathed. He grabbed his parka, slinging the medical satchel over his shoulder. Stay here, Balto. But the command meant nothing. The Husky was already on his feet, bounding off the porch and tearing through the snow ahead of him. Of course, Lucas muttered, running after him. You never listen. They moved fast, cutting through the forest toward the valley floor. The noise of the avalanche grew, a thunderous, rolling sound that filled the air like the growl of 1,000 beasts. Trees snapped in the distance, the ground shuddering beneath their boots and paws. By the time they reached the edge of the clearing, the slide had already hit. The slope was buried under tons of snow, the once clear path now an uneven wasteland of ice and shattered trees. Lucas stopped, panting, scanning the area. Balto, find them! The Husky lowered his head and began to circle, nose close to the ground. His tail was stiff, movements focused. Lucas followed, marking the search zones in his mind, the way he'd been trained in rescue drills years ago. After several minutes, Balto froze. He began digging furiously, paws throwing up snow. Lucas rushed to his side, dropping to his knees. Together they cleared the drift until a hand appeared, pale, unmoving. Got you, Lucas muttered, shoveling with his bare hands. Hold on. The first hiker, a man in his 40s, was unconscious but breathing. His pulse fluttered weakly beneath Lucas's fingers. Nearby, Balto was already digging again. Within moments they uncovered the second figure, a young woman coughing and shivering, her face streaked with ice. It's okay, Lucas said, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. You're safe now. The woman's lips trembled. The others, she whispered. Lucas frowned. Others? 2 more, she managed. They were behind us. Balto barked sharply, as if to say, I know. He took off again, nose to the wind, running along the base of the avalanche field. Lucas followed as best he could, heart pounding. The snow was heavy and unstable, each step a battle. Then Balto stopped. He began to dig again, this time deeper, more urgently. Lucas joined him, his hands raw and bleeding, until finally they uncovered the outline of another person, a teenager trapped under a log. His face was blue, eyes closed. Lucas felt for a pulse. Nothing. Come on, he said through gritted teeth. Not like this. He began CPR, pressing rhythmically against the boy's chest. 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe. He tilted the boy's head back, forcing air into his lungs. Balto barked beside him, whining softly, pacing in small circles as if urging him not to stop. Again. Again. The seconds stretched into eternity. And then, a cough, a sputter. The boy gasped, snow falling from his lips as he sucked in air. Lucas exhaled, shaking with relief. That's it. That's it. The husky let out a low, joyous howl that echoed across the valley. By the time the rescue team arrived from the ranger station, the survivors were stabilized and wrapped in emergency blankets. The pilot who'd come for supplies saw the smoke from Lucas's distress flare and radioed for help. 3 survivors, one of the rescuers said in disbelief. You did this alone? Lucas looked down at Balto, who was sitting beside the youngest boy, letting the child rest a trembling hand on his fur. Not alone, he said quietly. When the helicopter lifted off with the injured, Lucas stood in the snow, watching it fade into the horizon. The sun had begun to set, streaking the mountains in gold and crimson. Beside him, Balto's fur glowed in the fading light. The world was quiet again. Lucas knelt beside the husky, resting a hand on his neck. You hear that? He whispered. That's the sound of peace. You earned it. Balto turned his head toward him, eyes calm and knowing. They walked home together under a sky that had finally cleared. Stars began to appear, one by one, sharp and bright against the indigo expanse. The air was cold but gentle now, the kind of cold that embraced rather than punished. At the cabin, Lucas hung his jacket by the fire and sank into the old wooden chair. Balto curled up near the hearth, sighing deeply. The flames danced, reflecting in his ice-blue eyes like twin suns. Lucas picked up his journal, the one he hadn't written in since the war. He opened to a blank page and began to write. The storm came again, but it didn't take this time. It gave. It gave me purpose and a reason to fight, and a friend I'll never deserve. If anyone ever reads this, know that grace doesn't always come from heaven. Sometimes it walks beside you, silent and steadfast, with fur dusted in snow. He set the pen down, closing the journal gently. The cabin was quiet except for the soft crackle of the fire. Balto stirred, lifting his head to look at him. Time for bed, partner, Lucas said softly. The husky yawned, stretched, and lay his head on Lucas's boot. The man smiled, staring into the flames until his eyes grew heavy. Outside, a breeze moved through the trees, carrying the faint echo of a howl, long, deep, and resonant. Balto's ears twitched, but he didn't move. The sound wasn't a call to leave. It was a song of belonging, a promise whispered by the wilderness itself. And as the fire burned low, Lucas knew this time the silence would not come back empty. Because some storms don't come to destroy, they come to cleanse, to bring light back to those who've forgotten how to see it. And sometimes the echo that remains after the storm isn't thunder. It's the steady heartbeat of 4 paws walking beside you, reminding you that you were never alone. If this story touched your heart, remember, miracles still walk among us, sometimes on 4 paws. Don't leave before subscribing, because tomorrow's story might be the one that changes your day or your life. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Let's see how far Balto's story can travel.